بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Since I am traveling tomorrow, so I have trying to record this session for you, so that inshallah you would watch this tomorrow in the class. Our discussion, as you remember, is about غير المستقلات العقلية, those deductions, those arguments that we use aql as a reference for part of the deduction, and we use shar' for the other part. If both parts were understood by aql, it was mustaqillat aqliyah, which we discussed about the issue of goodness and badness. But if one part, one premise is taken from aql and the other from shar', then it is غير المستقلات العقلية. We already studied al-ijza, sufficiency, and muqaddimatul wajh. So the third is al-dhid, the opposite or the converse. Our scholars have a discussion about whether commanding something implies prohibition of its converse. To explain this further, we should explain what do we mean by converse and what are different types of converse or dhid or opposite. For example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says aqimus salah, so command has belonged to prayer. Saying prayer is obligatory. Okay. Now, opposite or converse for prayer is not praying or doing something else. If it is just not praying, we call it al-dhiddul am, general converse. If it is doing another action instead of prayer, it's called al-dhiddul khas, a specific converse. So the question is, when we are commanded to say our prayer, it's the time of prayer, we should and we must say our prayer. Is not praying prohibited? Is it haram shar'an? Can we imply from the command for prayer that its general opposite, and that is non-praying, is prohibited, it's haram? Is there any such implication? So that you have not said your prayer and you have committed a haram, al-dhiddul am. Or no, maybe someone says al-dhiddul am is not prohibited, but if you do something instead of doing prayer, al-dhiddul khas, you bring another action. For example, instead of saying your prayer, you go to cinema, you go to park, you watch TV. Is this going to cinema or park or watching TV, which maybe by itself okay, but now that you are supposed to pray and you don't pray and do this, is this prohibited? So there are two levels. Al-dhiddul am, general converse, means not doing prayer, not saying your prayer, or al-dhiddul khas, to bring another action instead of prayer. For sure, prayer is commanded. You have to bring it. And if you don't bring it, you have disobeyed, and you have committed a sin. Now the question is, can we go further and say that command for prayer implies that non-prayer or non-saying prayer is prohibited, or doing, for example, another thing like watching TV prohibited in the time of prayer or not? So here ulama have different opinions. Sheikh Fadli says, rahmatullah alayh, that most of ulama believe that commanding something implies and requires prohibiting its opposite, even its general opposite is prohibited shar'an, religiously. He says most of ulama have this idea. Of course, they themselves have different opinions about what would be the reason for this prohibition. They have argued differently. They have brought different arguments for what? For prohibition of general converse. But he says some of the very ingenious ulama, some of the very deep and thoughtful ulama have the idea that if something is commanded, it does not imply prohibition of its general converse religiously, shar'an. They say no. Why we need to have another hukm shar'i, another religious ruling? We have one religious ruling, and that is we have to say our prayer. If someone doesn't say prayer, he has committed a sin. That's very clear. Why we need to go further and say non-saying prayer is also haram? In the case that, in the sense that we have two religious rulings. One is necessity of prayer. One is hurma of non-prayer. They say we don't need this. When Shari has asked us to do something, it's clear that we must do it, and not doing it is not allowed. But we don't need to say there is a second religious rulings. Maybe those who say there are two, they may say, you have committed two sins. One is you have disobeyed saying prayer, and the other is that you have disobeyed by doing the opposite, which was haram. So, this is about al-Ziddul Am. Inshallah, the details can be discussed in more advanced and more detailed books. Sheikh Fadli stops here. Al-Ziddul Khas, a specific converse. As you remember, we said it means to do something instead of saying your prayer. What about this? Here the problem is more. So the chance of someone saying there is a religious ruling here is more, because this is more obvious. Not obvious, I'm saying makes more sense. Because to say that, saying prayer is wajib, then non-saying prayer is haram, doesn't really appeal. But someone says, if someone has not said his prayer and has gone to, for example, cinema, this going to cinema becomes prohibited because it is a specific converse of saying prayer. So here again, ulama have differences of opinion, but those who don't believe in prohibition of Ziddul Am, here some of them also say, we don't believe in the prohibition of Ziddul Khas. We don't need to say going to cinema is haram as a religious ruling, because what is important is prayer. Have you said your prayer or not? If you have not said your prayer, it's haram. Then if you have done something else, it's not a second haram. If that is by itself permissible, it's permissible. If it is not permissible, it's not permissible. But this does not become a second haram because you have not said your prayer. So this is a question that inshallah has to be discussed in more detailed books. So The general idea was this: does command for something imply, require that its converse is prohibited shar'an, religiously, or not? Here it's a question of judgment of reason. It's a rational question, and ulama have different opinions, but it seems that in both general converse and specific converse, there is no need to believe that there is a second religious ruling for the converse. Okay, now let's move on to the next place for rational judgment. Another case for غير المستقلات العقلية is a very important question in Usul al-Fiqh, very famous one, and that is اجتماع الأمر والنهي. Please listen very carefully so that you know the problem. The issue is this: اجتماع الأمر والنهي. Sometimes you have a command and a prohibition, and these two accidentally have belonged to the same thing. Accidentally. Because it's not possible that Shara says to do something which essentially, necessarily conflicts with, for example, another command which says not to do something. This is not possible. But sometimes by accident this happens. And sometimes actually it's by misbehavior of mukallaf. The person itself has done something which has caused him being put in such trouble that he is stuck between doing and not doing. There is a command and there's a prohibition. So we call it ijtima'ul amr wa namiz. Amr and nahy, command and prohibition have come together. They have belonged to the same person. Let us see what different types are there, and then what is the opinion of ulama, because different types can have different rulings. Sometimes a person has been put in such situation without having any option. There is istirar, emergency. For example, imagine if you are imprisoned in a place which is qasbi. It's not mubah. It's a place which is usurped. It's a place which is not permissible to use, but you didn't want. You are imprisoned in that place. There is an unjust ruler who has been doing zulm. He has taken over power with zulm. He has been using every facility like prisons and all the public spaces with zulm. And he has put you in this place. Maybe this prison belongs to people. Anyway, he is not legitimate for using this place or putting people in prison, and so on and so forth. So now you are put in this place. Or maybe people have hijacked you and have taken you as hostage, and they have taken you to a house of someone who is not there. They are misusing also that house and putting you in that house. So now the time of salat has come. Time of salat has come. On the one hand, you have to obey aqimus salah. There is amr which has belonged to you. You have to say your prayer. On the other hand, la taghsib. There is a prohibition which says don't do qasb. Don't use something and a place which doesn't belong to you and you don't have permission from the owner. So, ijtima'ul amr wan nahy. Aqimus salah, la taqsib. Both of them have belonged to this case. What should we do? Is it possible Some people said it's not possible. Some people said it's possible. Some people have differentiated. So there are different types of this. Let us discuss each type according to each opinion. For example, if there is manduha, it means there is a kind of way out. If there is a way out, for example, you are put in a place, or you have gone yourself to a place which is ghasbi, and you can't go out. Or if they have put you there, you can run away. Is there is an option for you to go out, and still you remain. Some ulama say it's not possible to have both amr and nahi, and we have to give preference to amr, to command. Then it means that you have to say your prayer, and because there is only amr, your prayer is valid and no problem. Some people say, yes, we accept that there cannot be ijtima of amr and nahy, but we give preference to the prohibition. So la taqsib is important, and you cannot say your prayer here and you have disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being there, and your prayer has become invalid. Even if you say your prayer is valid, invalid. You have to go out and say your prayer. So those who say it's not possible to have both amr and nahy, some of them give preference to amr, some of them give preference to nahy. If they give preference to amr, it means that amr for salat is there, you have obeyed it, and your salat is valid. You have committed a sin, it's another issue. But some people say no. Amr is defeated, nahy is given preference, and because there is nahy, your salat is not valid. Those who say it's possible to have amr and nahy together, they say your salat is valid, but at the same time, nahy is in its place, and you have committed a sin. So there are different opinions. Some say amr and nahy can be together. Some people say it cannot be together. Then if it cannot be, they cannot be together. Some people give preference to amr, some people give preference to nahy. All these three options are for when there is a choice, there is a way out, which makes it more difficult. If there is no way out, there is no manduha, there is no way to get rid of this conflict, there is a istirar, there is emergency, like they have imprisoned you in this place. You cannot go away. They have, put you there, they are watching you, there is no way to go out. Again, here they say, have you yourself caused this situation? It is true that you have no way out now, but are you responsible for being stuck in such situation? For example, did you do something that put you in this position? For example, you went to someone's house and now you are locked in. You cannot go out. You close the door, you lock the door, you lost the key, and the time of salat is there. You have put yourself in this. It is true that there is no way out for you now, but you have put yourself here. So besu'a ikhtiyar, with misuse of freedom of will, you have put yourself in this situation. Sometimes no, they have hijacked you and put you here. Okay, here ulama say that if there is emergency, you have no role in this, you have not created this problem for you, then they say your salat is in one sense ma'murun bih, it's wajib because amr has belonged to it, and in another way it's haram because it's a kind of tasarruf, it's a kind of using a place which is haram. So you are commanding and disobeying at the same time. Those who believe that ijtima is possible, they say you are obeying and you are disobeying. Obeying because you are saying your prayer, and you are disobeying because you are doing this in a haram place. Of course, I have to say something very important. This is based on the fatwa which says ibahatul makan is not a condition for prayer. If ibahatul makan is a condition for prayer, then it's like a person who cannot have wuzu. The prayer is void. No, imagine that ibahatul makan is not a condition. If ibahatul makan is not a condition for prayer, so prayer is okay, but this person has also committed a sin for qasb. And if there has been su'ul ikhtiyar, misuse, like as I said, someone has put himself into this such terrible situation. So here they say that the person has to try hard to go out of this situation, and in any case he is doing haram, and this haram cannot be missed, cannot be ignored, because you have not put yourself you have led yourself to this situation. You are not a hostage, you have put yourself in such terrible situation. So haram is there. And then those who believe in ijtima, they say salat is also okay, but you have disobeyed. And some say no, salat is not okay. So there are different opinions. At the moment, we don't need to make any stance. We don't need to choose any opinion. I just wanted you to understand the situation and to see how intellect can be playing a role in even fiqh, not just aqa'id. Even in fiqh, we can understand some rulings from aql. So, ijtima'ul amr wan nahy. I repeat it again. It means to have a case that accidentally has been subject for both command and prohibition. It cannot be always like this. God the Almighty doesn't, issue a command, a prohibition that always conflict. No, accidentally, saleh is general. La taqsib is general. Both of them are okay. But in one particular case, it can be a problem because both of these things have belonged to one person. Or for example, sometimes you have to save someone's life, but he is drowning in your neighbor's pool, swimming pool. Someone is drowning. Your neighbor is not there. You cannot get permission to enter into that house. So you have to save an innocent life. Also, you have to not to do qasb. So in this case, these two have belonged to you. Inqadh, saving, is wajib. Qasb is haram. So it can happen. In general, there is no problem. But in this particular case, there's problem. Some ulama say that it's possible to have both. Some people say, no, we have to choose one of them. Either we have to choose amr, we give preference to the amr, or we give preference to nahy. If we give preference to amr, it means you do it, you do the wajib, and there's no hurmah. If you give preference to haram, it means that you have missed the wajib. Some people say no, they can both be together, and if they are both together, so you have committed a sin, but also you have obeyed and listened and implemented the command. Then, when there is choice, it becomes more difficult for the people who believe in having both, and when there is no choice, it's easier. Or when you have put yourself into this situation, again, it becomes more difficult for you to be able to say that I am not disobeying, because you have put yourself in this situation. So this is the general question of اجتماع الأمر والنهي. The last thing for today is اقتضاء النهي الفساد. This is the fifth, and inshallah by studying this we finish الأدلة الاجتهادية, and the discussion about الكتاب والسنة والإجماع والعقل finished by this. So please pay attention, and it will be very short, and I don't enter into الأدلة الفقهية. We leave it for inshallah next session. اقتضاء النهي الفساد. اقتضاء means to imply, to lead to something. Nahi is prohibition. Fasad means invalidity, corruption, voidness. The question is this: if something is prohibited, in other words, you remember we had al-hukm al-taklifi and al-hukm al-wad'i. You remember the difference between al-hukm al-taklifi and al-hukm al-wad'i? We said al-hukm al-taklifi five. Wujub, hurma, ibaha, istihbab, karaha. These are al-ahkam al-taklifiyah. Hukm al-wad'i is not directly related to mukallaf's action. It leads to that. But for example, zawjiyah, talaq, صحة, fasad of mu'amala, shartiyya, sababiyya. These are things that are ahkam wad'i. They relate to a situation out of which some ahkam taklifi, of course, will originate. But al-ahkam al-wad'iyya immediately do not relate to the actions of mukallaf. We had this discussion in the early sessions. Now, the question is, if something is prohibited, so there is hukm taklifi, and you do it, does it mean that then it is invalid, or it is valid but you have committed a sin? For example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says on the day of Jum'ah, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. You must not do any trade or business or purchase when Salatul Jum'ah is going on. Suppose if we issue fatwa and say it is haram based on this ayah and other reasons, if we say, suppose, if we say this is haram, now the question is, if someone didn't close his shop and was selling goods to people, for example, a grocery shop, someone came and purchased milk, someone purchased bread, someone purchased, fruits. Okay, if we say it was haram, so he has committed a sin or few sins. But have these transactions been valid? So he owns the money that he has taken, and the people who purchased own the goods and the products that they have purchased, or the transactions are also fasid, are void. Do you see the question? So we don't have any question about hurma because we said nahi is there. The question is, does that nahi, that prohibition, imply invalidity of what is prohibited if he does it? So ulama here divide the issue into two parts. Sometimes prohibition has belonged to ibadah, an act of worship. sometimes it has belonged to a mu'amala, a transaction. When it comes to ibadah, it's very difficult. For example, if an act of worship is prohibited and still you do it, like Sawmul Eidain, it's haram to fast on Eid al-Ghadir, on Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. Eid al-Eidain, Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. Okay. Someone says, I want to fast. Okay, he has committed a sin. There is no doubt about committing a sin when he fasts. The question is this: is this fasting valid or void? So has he committed a fasting which is valid? So at least he has done something, but he has committed a sin, or it's totally useless, void, nothing. Or for example, if a lady who has period, who is in period, if she says Salat Zuhr, Salat Asr, Salat Maghrib, Isha, this is prohibited. If she says this Salat, is this Salat valid? Or it's void, it's useless? Or we should not recite Suwar al-Azaim, those chapters which have sajda wajib, compulsory sajda, we should not recite in Salat. If someone recites, is Salat okay? We know that he has committed a sin, but is Salat still okay? Is it still valid? Is it still sahih? Or if someone says Salat with, for example, a dress which is not permissible to use because it belongs to another person, it's qasbi. He has committed a sin for using this dress, but is Salat acceptable? Suppose it's not a condition for Salat to have a mubah dress. Or if it is prohibited to recite loudly for Salat al-Zuhr as to recite Hamd and Surah loudly, bil jahr. Suppose it is haram. Okay? Then if someone does it, is Salat valid or not valid? So there are different examples for an act of worship which is performed while there was prohibition on it. Is this valid? Normally ulama said no. How can an act of worship be valid when it is prohibited? How can you make the niyyah, the intention of taqarrub ila Allah, seeking nearness to Allah, when you are doing something that is obviously haram? When Allah says don't fast on the Eid day, Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr, then how you want to fast and say, inshallah, my fasting is okay, although I committed a sin? No. So most of ulama say, اقتضاء النهي للفساد بالنسبة إلى العبادة واضح. It's clear that prohibition implies that act of worship is void. What about mu'amala, transactions? Like the example of Friday, which I gave you. If, for example, it's prohibited to sell and buy when Salatul Jumu'ah is going on. So this person who has sold something or purchased something has committed a sin, but has the transaction also been invalidated or not? So here ulama divided into two types. Sometimes the prohibition is about the transaction in the sense that this aqd, this initiation of transaction should not be done. Like إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. They say, Shar-e Muqaddas, the holy legislator, does not have problem with buying or selling milk or fruits or bread or other things on the day of that you can buy them in other days or even in Jum'ah when Salat is finished. So the transaction is not a problem, but the act of selling is a problem. So you have, inshallah, you have not this, and no one is doing anything like this. But if someone has done this haram, then doesn't need to go back and say, take your money back and give my good. No, transaction is okay. But he has committed a sin. But there is another type. Sometimes the transaction itself is problematic. How? For example, prohibition of selling Quran. We should not, according to many ulama, we should not sell Quran. We should not take money for Quran. Some people, they write hadiyah as a gift. If you like, you give this money to the person who is giving you Quran. So according to some ulama, we cannot sell Quran. We cannot charge people for the Quran. Or for example, Bay'ul Mushaf min al-Kafir. Again, there is a discussion in fiqh. Can we sell Quran to kuffar, to people who don't believe in the Quran and they may, insult the Quran? In any case, in such issues, you see, the problem is not just why you are doing this in this time, Nafsul mu'amila. This selling of Quran has problem. Selling Quran in general or selling Quran to kuffar, this has problem. So we cannot say, okay, you have committed a sin, but the mu'amala is valid. No, mu'amala is not valid. You cannot take money or make money in this way. So again, this is very general. The more detailed discussions should come in, inshallah, advanced books on Usul al-Fiqh. So, shall I repeat? Okay. So, the question is this. اقتضاء النهي الفساد. Is prohibition implying voidness or invalidity of the action which is prohibited? So, if something is prohibited and still someone does it, is the action valid or not? Ulama say, if that action which is prohibited is ibadah, is an act of worship, it's not valid. Like fasting on the day of Eid. Of course, we mean Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Fasting on the day of Eid is haram. And if you fast, it's useless. It's void. But if it is mu'amala, not ibadah, it's a transaction. If the transaction is the problem just because of timing and other issues, but the essence of it is okay, so they say haram has been committed, but transaction is okay. Money can be owned. The seller has taken money from buyer, so he owns it. The buyer has taken the good, he owns it. But if the mu'amala itself, the transaction itself, not because of time or accidental things, in itself is problematic, like Bay'ul Mushaf, selling Quran in general, according to some, or to kuffar, according to some, if they are going to misuse and insult it. So here, if you sell it, you don't own the money. The transaction is haram and at the same time void. So, alhamdulillah, now we finished al-mustaqillat al-aqliya wa ghayr al-mustaqillat al-aqliya. Al-mustaqillat al-aqliya, we discussed the issue of tahsin wa taqbih, goodness and badness. We said they are rational, they are intrinsic, we can understand them by ourselves. If we for example, have a case that we know rationally that this is immoral, this is wrong, this is zulm, this is qabih, this is bad, this is ugly, we know that certainly Shari also has the same opinion. And we have غير المستقلات العقلية. Alhamdulillah, we finished also غير المستقلات العقلية. We discussed إجزاء, مقدمة الواجب, ضد اجتماع الأمر والنهي, اقتضاء النهي للفساد. We discuss all aspects of aql. Before that, we discuss ijma, sunnah, and kitab. So all four adillatul ijtihadiyya, alhamdulillah, are covered. Inshallah, now we have to move to al-adillatul fiqhiyya, which relates to al-usul al-amaliyya, the practical principles that we refer to, we apply when we have doubt about al-ahkamul waqi'iyya. When there is doubt about ahkam waqiyya, we have to have a practical solution. Then we have bara'a, takhir, istishab, ihtiyat. Inshallah, we will discuss them in the next session. Please remember me your du'as. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.